A minor villainess no more by Mostro. Prologue.
It began with her replaying her last memories, or at least the last thing she remembers. In her thoughts, she was walking to school. The sky was covered in a thick blanket of clouds, and despite that it was almost 8 a.m., she could recall how some shops weren't even open yet, despite that normally they would. Even the street was eerily empty. It was a series of abnormal things happening on a regular day. Then she sees herself walking down her school's pristine hallway, finally leaving after a long day, the lights of the midday sun shining down the empty hallway as she walked to reach some stairs. Both memories played in unison, then slowly melted together into one, making the image of each event less clear. She sees herself, waiting for the light to turn green to cross the street, but also placing her hand on top of the handrail as she began to walk down the stairs. Then saw herself putting her foot on the crosswalk. And just like that, she was just walking down the stairs. Both memories played together, and they ended together in unison with the loud sound of bones breaking. The sound made her flinch, just hard enough to wake her up, but not to open her eyes. Then she recalled that she did not remember falling asleep in the first place. But just as quickly the thought crossed her mind, it stopped being relevant because she was too groggy and a tad panicked to string her thoughts into a cohesive idea, or even words for that matter. So she did the most logical next step: open her eyes. But that proved to be more difficult than she expected, as she is met with what can only be described with a full body soreness. Her eyelids hurt the same way an arm or a leg would hurt the day after doing too much exercise, which was a first for her. Slowly, she opened her eyes and is met with a room full of natural light. Above her is a wood ceiling and a canopy over the bed. Okay, so she's inside a house, making that one less question to ask, but she still had 30-ish questions and answers, and her questions kept on piling on the more she looked around. Painstakingly, she raised her arms and rubs her face and eyes, removing some of the gunk she had over them, and jumped onto the next thing. Sitting up, her body groaned, literally. Her joints cracked and popped as she moved around. It's as if she was an ancient machine being turned on for the first time in ages. Her back and neck produced the worst sounds as she moved. They cracked so loudly that they made her jump in surprise. But finally, she had a better view of the room, and it was clear to her that the space she was sitting in was alien to her. The room was decorated in auburn wood, from the ceiling to the floor, with two of the walls decorated with a pink and green wallpaper, and finally a large open window with the light turquoise curtains. The bed was positioned right in the middle of the room, giving her a better view, which also included a slightly open door.
Her mind was still a jumbled mess, but she knew that that door had to be her next step. After removing the thin blanket that covered her, she placed her feet down, where she noticed a fluffy rug underneath her feet. Then, with all the strength she could muster, she took her first steps, only to notice too late that her legs could not hold her, so she fell down a short distance just from where she started. Her legs were weak, and the rest of her body felt that way too, but if I can't walk, I can crawl on my knees, she thought to herself, determined, but still out of it. She shuffled her way through the room, walking on her hands and knees, moving forward just as much as she could in order to reach the door and get answers. Surely there has to be someone around here, someone that she could bombard with questions like, where was she, or what happened to her? So she pressed on because she needed answers. But then she stops. She stops moving and stops herself just right in front of a mirror. This mirror did not appear out of thin air. It was always there. But it took her a long time to notice it. But a mirror is hard to miss, especially when the reflection you see on it looks nothing like what you're used to see on the other side. Looking back at her is an emaciated girl, dressed in a simple nightgown that looked way too big on her body. Her skin is tan, but looked dull and sickly, with freckles adorning her cheeks and nose. Her eyes were big, and her eyelashes were long, and growing from her head a ridiculously long curly crown of blonde hair that cascaded from the top of her head down to her body and pulling down to the floor. And right there, behind the blanket of hair and those long eyelashes, a pair of bright ocean blue eyes that reminded her of a gem that she always wished to get her hands on. The stranger in the mirror made her confused. Then she suddenly felt really uncomfortable. This was not hair. That hair she was looking at was not the right length. Her hair is short and this hair is too long. She felt distressed with a disgusting sensation that she could feel in both her skin and bones. This was not right, and that made her even more confused. Then she noticed something, a shiny silver object calmly sitting on top of a dresser. She recognized the object as scissors. So, without much thought, she reached for them, and without a second thought about it, she cut a lock of hair, giving her a window through the blonde curtain, and making her relax a bit. But that wasn't enough. It was still too much hair for her to have. Her hair is short. Short, she says. So she grabbed another chunk and cut it too. Who cares if one is longer? All it's all uneven. But just as she grabbed yet another lock between the blades, something behind her falls to the floor and breaks. The crash makes her flinch, and immediately she returns to her senses. Looking to the side, she finds a woman standing in the doorway, looking at her with an expression of pure shock, one only reserved for protagonists in horror movies. The mysterious woman is wearing a single piece black dress, with a matching kerchief on her head, 3/4 sleeves, and a perfectly clean white apron on her waist. But why is there a maid cosplayer here? Finally, she decided to speak, starting to feel uncomfortable with the maid just gawking at her as if she's an oddity. Hi, she said, her voice hoarse and her throat dry. I I was just cutting my hair. The statement was innocent, but it only seemed to make the maid freak out even more, her hands shaking like she did not know what to do with them. Then she gasped, realizing something. She turns around and runs out of the room, leaving the door wide open. And just as quickly as the maid appeared, she disappeared in the corner of the hallway, her footsteps disappearing quickly in the distance as she ran. Then, this strange place that was so quiet like an abandoned house suddenly is filled with multiple voices and murmurs, as the maid who just ran from the room loudly announced to everyone in it, "Call the Count! Call Count Guile! The young lady finally woke up! The young lady finally woke up!"